The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne left Vienna for the privacy of the imperial hunting lodge at Mayerling. An unannounced guest was the 17-year-old Baroness Marie Vetsera. Were their deaths that night the result of a suicide pact? "You must not admit anyone to my room, not even the Emperor himself," Archduke Rudolf told his valet, Johann Luschek, shortly before retiring to his bedroom at nearly 2 a.m. on Wednesday, January 30, 1889. Luschek assumed the heir apparent merely wanted an undisturbed night with his voluptuous new mistress, Baroness Marie Vetsera. The pair had arrived at Mayerling, the imperial hunting lodge 18 miles south of Vienna, on Monday afternoon. The Crown Prince, travelling without guards and presumably alone, had ostensibly come for recreational shooting with his friend Count Hoyos and his brother-in-law, the Prince of Coburg. Marie, secretly spirited out of the capital and kept hidden from the other guests, had been brought for a romantic interlude. At 6:30 a.m., Luschek was startled awake by his master, who asked to be called for breakfast within an hour, then withdrew again to his private bedroom. After repeated knocks between 7:30 and 8 o'clock brought no response, the valet grew alarmed and summoned Count Hoyos and the Prince of Coburg. When they ordered him to break down the door, Luschek blurted out the secret. Archduke Rudolf was not alone. Marie Vetsera was with him. Taking an axe to the door, the valet hacked open a hole through which they could peer at the horrifying sight. Fully dressed on the bed, both Rudolf and Marie were dead. The young woman held a single rose. Her lover sat half upright, slumped toward a night table on which a mirror stood. After putting a bullet through Marie's head, Rudolf had used the mirror to take aim at himself. Their mingled blood on the sheets was only partly dried. Count Hoyos raced by carriage to the nearest train station, flagged an express, and arrived at the palace in Vienna about 10:15 a.m. lacking the nerve to approach Emperor Franz Joseph with the truth. He told Empress Elizabeth that Marie had poisoned herself and the heir apparent. Relayed to the Emperor, this became the first false story in an unsuccessful attempt to shield the monarchy from scandal. On Thursday, January 31st, a banner headline on a black-bordered front page soberly announced that the 30-year-old Crown Prince was dead. The cause of death was first said to be a stroke, then a heart attack, and finally an accidental gunshot wound. Not until the following day was it revealed that Rudolf had committed suicide. Nothing was said about Marie Vetsera. As the only son of Franz Joseph, Rudolf had been educated from boyhood to inherit the vast, polyglot empire that sprawled across Central Europe. In addition to being Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary, his father ruled much of what is now the Czech Republic and parts of the Balkans. The crafty old emperor understood that only a strong army could sustain what was known as the dual monarchy. And thus Rudolf, sensitive, intelligent, and quick-witted, was subjected early to the rigors of military life, trained for the day he would command the imperial army. Empress Elizabeth intervened. A free-spirited woman who escaped court routine by traveling incognito throughout Europe with only a single lady-in-waiting, she hired a tutor for her son, Joseph Latour von Thurnberg, a man of liberal, humanitarian views. He ensured Rudolf learned more of life than barracks routine and maneuvers, and introduced his pupil to visionary scholars. Rudolf came to see that he was living in changing times, and caught an unpleasant whiff of the musty, decaying odor of his father's improbable domain. The empire is but a powerful ruin, at present still standing but eventually condemned to collapse, the Crown Prince wrote in an academic paper at age 15. Although the monarchy has lasted for hundreds of years, as long as the people blindly accepted its authority, its function has now ended. All mankind is destined to be free, and during the next storm this ship is fated to sink. Revolutionary doctrine from one so close to the throne, and when Franz Joseph learned of his son's views, he took steps to exclude Rudolf from affairs of state. A new vision for Europe. Undeterred, Rudolf bombarded the emperor with memos contrasting authoritarian Habsburg rule with the yearnings for democracy surging across Europe. Franz Joseph refused to read them, but he found it harder to ignore the anonymous articles his son contributed to the Neues Wiener Tagblatt, New Vienna Daily, a radical newspaper founded by Rudolf's friend Moritz Seps. The identity of the writer soon became known not only in Vienna but in Berlin, where Chancellor Bismarck ordered secret agents to watch the potentially troublesome heir. Along with many Austrians and Hungarians, Rudolf viewed with alarm his country's close ties to a Germany newly united under the Prussian House of Hohenzollern. Instead, he argued, the dual monarchy should placate its Slavic subjects by reaching out to Russia, Germany's enemy. For a time, he consoled himself with a vision of a Europe united in tolerance and cooperation. This would come to pass, he believed, when he and two other liberal-minded heirs ascended their thrones, Prince Frederick in Germany and Edward, Prince of Wales, in Britain. It was not to be. Frederick died of cancer within a year of becoming emperor, and his bombastic son, Wilhelm II, scarcely shared Rudolf's hopes for a peaceful, united Europe. Edward would have to wait until 1901 for the death of his mother, Queen Victoria. By 1888, Rudolf found himself increasingly isolated as popular clamour rose for Austria-Hungary's unification with the German Reich. Ugly antisemitism surfaced. Opponents were labelled not only traitors but captives of Jewish money interests. "We believe, after all, in a great, beautiful future," Rudolf had once told Moritz Seps. No longer able to cherish that notion, he acknowledged defeat in politics and, in what proved to be the last year of his life, surrendered to debauchery. A morbid desire. The handsome crown prince had never lacked for female companionship. Before or after his marriage in 1881 at age 23 to Princess Stephanie, the daughter of the King of Belgium. The sober, rather unattractive 16-year-old his father had chosen was far from Rudolf's taste. Their only child, a daughter barred from succession, was born 2 years later. Stephanie, apparently having contracted syphilis from her husband, was unable to bear other children. The couple soon lived in separate quarters, maintaining only the appearance of marriage as court etiquette required. Losing himself in drink, drugs, and women of the demi-monde, Rudolf developed a morbid death wish. Among the women who captured his fancy was Mitzi Kasper, registered in his retinue as a household assistant. According to Rudolf's sister-in-law, Mitzi was a sweet girl, seemingly devoted to him. But when Rudolf proposed a suicide pact, she first laughed, then refused when she realized he was serious. In October 1888, he found a more gullible accomplice. Baroness Marie Vetsera, or Mary, as she preferred, was a dark-haired beauty of Greek and Czech-Austrian descent, with soulful eyes beneath heavy lids and a small but sensuous mouth. Countess Wallis-Alarish, Marie's friend and sponsor at court, described her as having a lithe, well-developed figure that made her seem older than 17 and a graceful, irresistibly seductive walk. It was widely known she had already had several lovers. Marie was introduced to Rudolf at the races on October 7th by England's Prince of Wales, whose acquaintance with pretty young women was legendary. A week later, directed by Countess Wallis-Alarish, she placed herself in a theatre box near Rudolf's at a gala opening night. By the end of the month, they had their first tryst. As Rudolf's driver opened the doors of both the imperial carriage and the Countess's carriage, pulled up alongside, Marie slipped from one vehicle to the other unseen. The driver, discreetly looking away, closed his ears as the blissful couple had their first moments together. Before long, the Countess was accompanying Marie to Rudolf's private apartment, both ladies swathing their faces in feather boas to avoid recognition. Kept waiting in Rudolf's study one day, Marie found herself staring at a revolver placed next to a skull on his desk. She had picked up the skull for a closer look when Rudolf entered. Seeing concern in his eyes, she told him she was not afraid of death. In mid-November, he gave her an iron ring engraved with the letters Ilvbit. He told her they stood for in Lieb virent bis in den Tod, by love united unto death. She wore it on a chain around her neck, concealed beneath her bodice. To her former governess, Marie wrote, "If I could give my life to make him happy, I would gladly do it, because I do not value my own life." In fact, she added, they had made a pact. After a few happy hours at a place nobody knows, we will enter death together. Treason in the imperial family? If Marie's letters are believed, the affair was not consummated until January 13th, 1889. Enraptured, she promptly ordered a gold cigarette case for Rudolf, inscribed with the momentous date and the phrase "in gratitude to destiny." Court obligations kept Rudolf busy for much of the final 2 weeks of the month. Yet no matter how late the party, on most mornings he rose early to hunt in the country. He also found time to edit the second volume of an illustrated history of the dual monarchy and to correspond with Hungarian friends challenging Austria's dominance within the empire. There had once been talk of Rudolf becoming king of a separate Hungary, and the emperor watched his son's possibly treasonous activities closely. On January 26th, father and son had a stormy meeting. The argument may have begun with Franz Joseph reproaching Rudolf for his increasingly notorious lifestyle. Or perhaps the emperor questioned the shattered marriage with Stephanie. He had learned of Rudolf's overtures to the Vatican about an annulment. Could Rudolf truly have been thinking of remarriage? To an adventuress such as Marie Vetsera? Inevitably, the discussion would have turned to politics and Rudolf's dangerous flirtation with Hungarian separatists. Later that day, one of Stephanie's ladies-in-waiting described Rudolf as looking terribly distraught, totally wasted. The hand holding a general's hat trembled visibly. A servant told her the meeting had ended with the infuriated emperor shouting, "You are not worthy of becoming my successor." The fateful tryst at Mayerling. Somehow Rudolf got through the weekend, a Saturday dinner at the palace honoring the German emperor's birthday, and a Sunday reception marking the anniversary at the German embassy. At the latter, in a tense, awkward moment, Marie Vetsera was presented to Crown Princess Stephanie, pausing just long enough before curtsying to silence the chatter of apprehensive onlookers. After the reception, Rudolf called on Mitzi Caspar and stayed until 3 a.m. Monday morning. That very day, he told her, he was going on another hunt, the final one. As they parted, he made the sign of the cross on her forehead. Late Monday morning, January 28th, 2 carriages left Vienna by the same route, half an hour apart. In the first was Marie. In the second, Rudolf, discreetly followed by a detachment of secret police. As the Crown Prince's carriage slowed upon entering a thicket of woods, Rudolf deftly jumped down and disappeared into the trees. When his coach turned back toward Vienna, the police followed. Rudolf made his way to an enclosed for the winter, where Marie's carriage waited. Laughing at the easy deception, the couple drove on to Mayerling, arriving just before early twilight. On Tuesday morning, Rudolf's hunting guests arrived, but they were not told the Baroness was there. Rudolf, feigning a cold, excused himself from hunting that day and in the afternoon sent a wire to Stephanie. Explaining that his indisposition would prevent him from attending a palace dinner, he asked her to beg the emperor's pardon most obediently. He would stay at Mayerling another day. The Crown Prince appeared to enjoy dinner with his hunting friends, who retired to another part of the compound about 9 p.m. Shortly thereafter, Marie Vetsera appeared, looking a bit disheveled in the same dress she had worn on the ride from Vienna and impatiently asking for her own dinner. A servant was summoned to sing and whistle popular tunes. The pair lingered in apparent happiness until the small hours of Wednesday morning, when Rudolf gave strict instructions not to be disturbed and retired to his private chambers with the young Baroness. Rudolf left several farewell letters, to his mother, to his wife, to Mitzi Caspar, to his valet Loschek. In none did he explain the suicide pact. "Now you are free from my presence and torture," he wrote Stephanie. "I face death calmly, as it is the only way I can save my good name." He thanked Loschek for years of service and asked that a priest be summoned. "I have no right to go on living," he wrote to Empress Elizabeth, apparently after shooting Marie but before turning the gun on himself. "I have killed." He asked to be buried with his mistress in the nearby Heiligenkreuz monastery. To Franz Joseph, Rudolf wrote nothing. Perhaps the old emperor needed no explanation. All the reasons for the tragedy had been laid bare 4 days earlier in that last, bitter meeting. A bizarre exit. Not until Thursday morning, January 31st, did the emperor learn the real cause of his son's death. Displaying only momentary shock, he made 2 quick, irreversible decisions. Despite any clerical objections, Rudolf was to be granted a full church burial. Marie Vetsera's body was to be disposed of as quickly as possible. Her name was to vanish as completely as her person. To avoid any appearance that a second death had occurred at Mayerling, no hearse was sent to the lodge. Instead, 2 of Marie's uncles arrived late that afternoon in a carriage to claim the body. With blood washed from her face and the corpse fully dressed in hat and coat, stiff with rigor mortis, Marie was walked from the lodge to the carriage and seated between the 2 men. A broomstick up the back of her dress kept the body from toppling forward during the short ride to Heiligenkreuz monastery, where she, unaccompanied by Rudolf, was to be buried. A policeman later wrote of his shock. "Just as the tower clock was striking midnight, a carriage appeared, not the hearse I was expecting. As I stepped forward in the darkness to see who it might be, a mocking illusion from hell greeted me. Seated between 2 gentlemen in the back seat was Marie Vetsera, fully dressed and upright, but also quite dead." When the secret burial was complete, the officer in charge sent a cryptic telegram to Vienna. All done. No death certificate was issued. Only weeks later was an entry made in the parish death registry. Somehow escaping the imperial censor, a provincial newspaper reported that Baroness Vetsera had died suddenly in Venice and been buried in a family plot in Bohemia. As long as Franz Joseph remained emperor, however, her name would never again appear in print in Austria-Hungary. As for Rudolf, court physicians ruled that an autopsy revealed abnormal mental disturbance at the time of death. Not having been lucid, he could not be held responsible for suicide. Therefore, the church could not object to burial in the Habsburg family crypt at the Church of the Capuchin Fathers. Dressed in a white general's uniform, his head swathed to conceal the terrible wound, the Crown Prince's body was put on public display. Thousands poured through the court chapel to view the remains. Elizabeth and Stephanie took to their beds in grief, but Franz Joseph remained at his desk, personally revising acknowledgements of condolences drafted by his secretaries and attending to every last detail of the funeral, held on February 5th. Foreign delegates were barred. At this profoundly moving ceremony of mourning, they were told, the emperor wanted none but the closest members of his family. It took tact and firmness to discourage even the German emperor, Wilhelm II, from attending. Franz Joseph wrote, "Accept our warmest thanks for your loyal friendship and also for your intention to come here. If I ask you not to do so, you may judge how deeply crushed my family is if we have to address this request even to you." The only foreign royalty invited were Stephanie's parents, the King and Queen of Belgium. Yet even without foreign visitors, masses of subjects lined Vienna's streets on Tuesday, February 5th, as the hearse carried Rudolf's body from the palace to the Capuchin church. The city's silence broke only with the toll of bells, the clatter of hoofbeats from military honor guards, and the creak of wheels on Habsburg carriages. According to ancient ritual, a court chamberlain sought admission by rapping on the door with a golden staff. "Who is there?" asked a friar from within. "The Crown Prince Rudolf," replied the chamberlain. The door remained closed, even after the question and answer were repeated. Only on the third exchange did the chamberlain respond, "Your brother Rudolf, a poor sinner." Then the door swung open to admit the casket and mourners. At the conclusion of the simple ceremony, the emperor broke tradition, knelt at his son's coffin, and whispered a prayer. Rising, Franz Joseph dried his eyes with a handkerchief and made a brisk exit. There would be 3 months of official mourning at court, categorized by rigid etiquette as deepest, deep, and limited. For Franz Joseph, there remained another quarter-century of authoritarian rule ahead.